The year is 1964, and India mourns as one of its founding fathers, Pandit Nehru, dies. In the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson wins a landslide victory in the presidential election. And at Kennedy Airport, there are crowds of another sort. Young New Yorkers greet the Beatles as their first visit to the United States begins.
I am the greatest.
Elsewhere in the city, Cassius Clay makes a familiar announcement.
Tell him, what are we going to do? We're going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Ah, rumble, young man, rumble. Ah, that's what we're going to do. You heard it. That's my trainer. He'll tell you.
Many miles to the south, Miami was the fashionable 60s hangout where the beach boys and girls of the East Coast showed off their tans and their physiques. They spent their days on the water, their nights on the prowl, and among them were many who didn't mind how they got their money so long as it came rolling in to finance a lifestyle that included plenty of sex, plenty of drink, and above all, surfing. But that autumn of 1964, a trio of surfers left their boards in Miami and flew north to the chill of New York. They were Roger Frederick Clark, aged 29, described as quiet and angelic-looking, 26-year-old swimming instructor and diver Alan Kuhn, owner of a two-masted schooner and a 50-foot speedboat, and 27-year-old surfing champion Jack Roland Murphy, also known as Murph the Surf. They had dreamed a crooked dream down there on the beaches of a way to finance their lifestyle for life, and now they were going to make it happen in the big city. Inspired by generations of Hollywood movies about jewel robberies, their target was the American Museum of Natural History, overlooking Central Park. Over the years, this had become home to one of the world's most dazzling collections of precious stones. The three beach boys checked into the best suite of an expensive hotel about 10 blocks from the museum and identified themselves as an underwater salvage team. Over the next few weeks, they were among the most frequent visitors to the museum and its shop, where they were able to buy plans of the museum and details of all the jewels. They prowled the galleries, locating the most tempting prizes and looking for signs of any alarms which might upset their caper. Then, on the night of the 29th of October, they went museum visiting again, after it had closed. While one kept watch, the others scaled a 10-foot wall and forced open a door. They made their way to a fifth-floor office and climbed out of its window. Using Venetian blind tape, they lowered themselves into the jewel gallery below, where the windows were routinely left 2 inches open. Amazed to realize that there were no alarms, they helped themselves to 24 of the choicest stones and escaped undetected. The next morning, the din of police sirens and screech of tires was greater than usual on the streets of New York City. The patrol cars were, of course, racing to the Museum of Natural History, where the robbery had only been discovered when a guard arrived for work. As detectives descended on the museum, officials there were in an agony of embarrassment, for they had to explain how the robbers had climbed the wall, made their way to the unlocked fifth-floor office, performed their death-defying stunt 100 feet above Central Park, and got into the J.P. Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals without any alert being sounded. As they searched for fingerprints, which were plentiful but confusing, New York City investigators were shocked to discover that the burglar alarm system had been disconnected several years before as an economy measure. Working with care and ignoring smaller stones, the thieves had cut a piece of glass from the case containing the richest jewels. They put strips of tape across the circle to stop it shattering, then hit it with a metal window washing squeegee taken from a porter's locker. New York's press was shocked at the daring of the robbery. Reporters pressed a police spokesman for details about how it could have been possible.
Have you found any way in which the thieves may have gotten into this room in the building?
Well, we have some theory which is being explored and exploited at the present moment, and at this particular time I would rather refrain from answering that question.
Would that be the window?
Well, that's a possibility, the window. This becomes a matter of serious and intensive investigation, and at this moment I wouldn't care to say.
The window was slightly open.
It was open.
The police spokesman soon revealed that the scale of the robbery did not seem to be matched by the thieves' expertise. A reporter asked whether their methods suggested that they were professionals.
This becomes a matter of conjecture, but it would appear that a professional burglar would have a little better tools than we now find here. However, it's still a matter of conjecture at this moment.
The police also felt that professionals would not have chosen such an obvious selection. They had taken, on the left, the Midnight Star Sapphire, 161 carats, on the right, the DeLong Star Ruby, 100 carats, and as big as a golf ball, the Star of India, at 565.35 carats, the world's largest sapphire.
Would you say that the thieves knew what they were looking for?
Oh, definitely, because in addition to the exposition of these precious stones, there was a brief history of each one contained in the case, and they'd know it would indicate the size and not value, but the particular gem collection that they came from.
You think it would be difficult for anyone to get rid of these jewels, to fence them, so to speak?
It would be quite difficult because these are most important to art collectors and gem collectors, but their size and such would indicate to them that the person having them presently wouldn't be in a position to own them.
He was to be proved right. But even as the detective was talking, the thieves had split up, with Roger Clark heading north to his parents' home in Connecticut. The others put the jewels into a locked briefcase and asked a 19-year-old girl named Janet Florkiewicz, who they had met and romanced at the hotel in New York, to take it to Florida for them. They took the same flight as Janet, but pretended not to know her. Janet turned out to be the initial lead to the jewel thieves, when she became suspicious of the contents of the case she was transporting. On arrival in Miami, she telephoned a girlfriend back at the hotel in New York saying something fishy's going on. The girlfriend told another resident, who remembered noticing a book, The Story of Gems, in the three men's suite, and that it had been published by the American Museum of Natural History. They went to the police, and within hours of the robbery, detectives in New York were ready to swoop on the first of the three men who had got away with one of the most daring jewel robberies of the century. The FBI was waiting at the hotel when Roger Clark drove back to Manhattan to collect his belongings. which included burglary tools and photographs of parts of the museum. Meanwhile, down in Miami, other agents hammered on the door of the apartment where his two friends lived. Murph the Surf was at home with two girlfriends for company. Clad only in a pair of shorts, he had no chance to make a getaway. "I was supposed to be on my way to Hawaii to surf," he complained. "This has fouled the whole thing up." About 10 minutes later, Alan Kuhn walked in to find himself surrounded by FBI men, who quickly slipped handcuffs onto him. It was Kuhn who had romanced and recruited their nemesis, Janet Florkiewicz, and he now snarled a line James Cagney could have uttered. That's what happens when you fool around with square broads. On the 18th of November, they flew voluntarily back to New York to face charges. A deal had already been worked out with their lawyers, offering bail in return for cooperation. As long as the trio could keep the FBI guessing where the irreplaceable jewels were, they had a bargaining position, and they knew it. Murphy and Kuhn flew in as celebrities, portrayed by the media as idle playboys who had taken on the challenge of getting into and out of an Aladdin's cave that most people assumed would be as impregnable as Fort Knox. Murph the Surf, in particular, caught the public imagination, claiming as he did that it was he who had brought the sport of surfing from Hawaii to Miami, thus helping to launch a whole new American industry. So there was a large crowd of press and media men at Kennedy Airport to see him and Alan Kuhn arrive to post bail.
I'm shooting the wrong guy.
The two men were anxious to correct reporters who had described them as beach bums, explaining that there was a world of difference between beach boys, which they were, and beach bums, who were parasites. They had had an early morning swim, they confided, and were so confident of getting bail that they hadn't brought any luggage with them. They gave the impression of being rich young men playing a game. The truth was rather different. The Miami police had been watching them for months. Up to 6 months previously, they had been beach bums, picked up several times for vagrancy. But that spring they had sailed to the Caribbean, and while they were in Nassau, there was a robbery of jewels worth $750,000. This robbery was not solved, and Miami Beach's chief of detectives perhaps overreacted when he was quoted as saying, "They are crack jewel thieves. We've been trying to pin something on them for a long time." They got their promised bail, which was set at $32,000, and were able to fly back to Miami that same night, as they had forecast. But the FBI wanted the jewels back, and was afraid that at least some of them had already been fenced. As a sweetener, the feds dropped the charges of transporting stolen goods from state to state. But the New York larceny charges still stood for the three men. On the 4th of January, on bail from another robbery charge in Miami, Murphy and Kuhn were arrested again as they left a New York courthouse while renewing their bail. This time the charge involved a paltry $250. The desk clerk at the Algonquin Hotel identified Murphy as one of the men who had pistol-whipped him during a hold-up. The next day, actress Ava Gabor identified Murphy and Kuhn as the men who had forced their way into her apartment, beating her up and stealing her jewelry worth $50,000. New bail was set at $150,000 each. Faced with a long prison sentence, Alan Kuhn decided that the time had come to cooperate, and he agreed to fly back to Miami with 2 detectives and an assistant district attorney to locate and hand over the missing jewels. Hotly pursued by dozens of reporters, the quartet started their treasure hunt from Kuhn's apartment and took in a variety of bars and hotels. Kuhn made a total of 50 calls. At one point, suspecting that the expert diver had stashed the jewels somewhere underwater, the assistant DA put on goggles and fins at a tipped-off location, but only got wet for his trouble. Finally, at 3 in the morning on the 8th of January, an informer revealed where the jewels now were. His tip sent the party racing to a Trailways bus terminal in downtown Miami, hotly pursued by the press. There, in locker 911, were the Star of India and 8 other gems in 2 brown suede pouches. The bags were wet and looked as though they had been hidden in the sea, but the water still soaking them was not salty. Any pretense that the 3 beach boys had had nothing to do with the robbery was now at an end, and all that they could do was bargain over the gems which had not yet been returned. They pleaded guilty, and the DA now offered to ask for only a year in prison if the 3 men came up with the rest of the gems, but the 3 robbers had sold them long ago to pay for their legal aid. In the end, they each got 3 consecutive 1-year sentences. But by the time of their sentencing, the DeLong ruby had been acquired by a Miami gangster, who offered it to millionaire John D. MacArthur for a $25,000 ransom. Nominated as go-between was writer Francis Amstel. He collected the money and left it, as instructed, in a telephone booth where the phone was ringing. When he answered, he was told that the jewel had been hidden in another booth above the door. He found it there and passed it over to a jeweler standing by to identify it as genuine. John MacArthur was acclaimed as a benefactor, but controversy soon followed as to the ethics of paying a ransom. Would it not encourage further thefts? Whatever the ethics, the museum was deeply grateful for the return of the jewels. Museum officials accepted that they would never get all the smaller jewels back. 9 of these had almost certainly been broken up and sold in pieces. But there was palpable relief that the Star of India, the DeLong Star Ruby, and the other recovered gems could go back on show again, and this time the precautions would be formidable. The 3 beach boys served almost 2 years of their sentence and were quietly paroled. But while the other 2 slipped from sight, Murph the Surf kept popping up in the public eye. He and Kuhn had escaped a trial for robbing and harming actress Ava Gabor because she was too busy in Hollywood to come to New York. He then went to Los Angeles, where he was soon arrested in connection with several jewel heists. Luckily for him, the evidence was insufficient, so he was allowed to go. Soon after returning to Florida, he was back to his old business. In 1968, he joined in a violent robbery at the home of millionairess Olivia Wofford, who was forced to open a safe. She tripped a secret alarm button, and the gang was caught. Murph attempted to escape by leaping through a plate glass window, but he too was apprehended, bleeding profusely, and had to be patched up at the hospital before being taken to the police station. His lawyer argued that he was incapable of understanding right from wrong, and a psychiatrist said that Murphy believed he was a modern Robin Hood. If he was not playing up here for the cameras, he certainly acted in a strange way for a police suspect. The bloody climax to Jack Murphy's criminal career came in 1969, when he was arrested for murder in the parking lot of Valenti's restaurant in Miami. Murph and his partner Jack Griffith were accused of persuading two secretaries at a Los Angeles finance house to walk off with $500,000 in securities. The two men were picked up, when soon afterwards the bodies of the two girls were found weighted down with concrete blocks, dumped in a drainage canal named Whiskey Creek near Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Found guilty of murder, both men were sentenced to life imprisonment. But Murphy appealed on grounds of insanity and was committed to a top-security mental hospital. "16 years later, in 1985, apparently cured and now with a new but permissible obsession that he was on earth to preach God's word, Jack Murphy was allowed to leave hospital to go to a rehabilitation center. Fellow prisoners sang hymns to bid him Godspeed, and the former playboy and jewel thief showed that he could still attract media attention as he claimed to be totally reformed.
God has used this system and this experience to help me get my priorities and my life straightened out.